cow parsley. And I'll tell you why. Because it encapsulates the sort of next big unanswered thing that I would really like to understand. So if you think about cow parsley, the head of a cow parsley with all those flowers, if you look at it, it's kind of a flat plate of flowers. It's a flat plate of little white flowers. You flip it over and look on the other side. Those flowers are made on a multitude of little branching stems. So some of them have relatively few branches underneath them. Some of them are, higher order things, and they're all in one flat plate. So how is it that a flower that's a branch on a branch on a branch on a branch winds up at exactly the same level as a flower that's just a branch on a branch across that flat plate? How do they know? And there are a lot of, it's an extreme version of another question in branching, which is what I've worked on for most of my life, shoot branching, where the secondary shoots, it's a slightly different version, because the secondary shoots never get taller than the primary shoot. And how do they know? There's no particular reason underpinning that. And it's one of those big mysteries. And cow parsley is the kind of quintessential example.
What is my favourite plant and why? I'm not sure I have got a favourite plant, which is a bit of a shocker. But I've been working today with some garlic root tips, and you can see if you prepare a slide with the garlic root tips and stain those slides, you can then see some of the cells undergoing mitosis, so cell division, and that's really cool to see. You can see the chromosomes and see the different stages of mitosis, and actually that's pretty cool to see. So today it's garlic.
My favourite plant, I think, are stinging nettles. I really, really love stinging nettles for loads of reasons. I think, first of all, because they're a weed, and everyone's like, oh, I don't like them. But they are so amazingly useful and so amazingly important. So people don't realise how useful they are. All of the green dye that we dyed the soldiers' uniforms with during World War II, we got from chlorophyll inside stinging nettles. They're really tasty. They're a superfood, so you can eat them as you would spinach. The stalks you can weave the same way that you would hemp, and it's got natural antibacterial properties, which is pretty awesome. And they're really important nursery grounds for butterflies and moths and various other invertebrates. So I feel like we need to start harnessing the power of stinging nettles and incorporating them into our food and our clothing much more than we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer, since I have too many favorite plants. So when I was in Seattle, Washington, I was at the Pacific Northwest. My definite favorite was salal. It's a very native plant in the area, and it really prevents the landsliding and protect the soil, because they have a very strong roots, and they make a berry that indigenous people in the Seattle area used to use it for food and medicine and dyes and many coloring and many different things. And it's such a beautiful small plants with dark green shiny leaves and many berries. So that was definitely my favorite. But since I moved to Austin, Texas, quite different location of the United States, much more southwest, and now all the native plants around the area, Mexico and Texas, are completely different. So I finally get to learn which is the plants that is native to Texas or that area, and what how they grow and develop. So enjoying gardening a lot. So I am going to have a new favorite plants soon.
I think my favorite plant is still Arabidopsis, because it's just such a great tool. I think if you're a microscopist, you love Arabidopsis, because you can look down the microscope and just see all these beautiful things. You can see the cytoskeleton moving, you can see the cell wall, you can see the nucleus, you can look at the mutants, and I think that still makes it my favorite plant.
My favourite plant at the moment are balls of algae that we call marimo, and they're found in cold freshwater lakes in northern latitudes such as in Iceland and in Japan, and they form these beautiful spheres that form and are quite rare as well, and they're interesting, and you can buy ones to have at home as a pet.
At the moment, I think my favourite plants are tomatoes, and there's two reasons for that. So firstly, we've got a tomato project in the lab, and I've got a PhD student studying tomato domestication. And we've got a room in the greenhouse at the moment with 200 tomato plants, of wild and domesticated ones with green fruits, yellow fruits and red fruits. But also the second reason is I've got a particularly bumper looking crop of tomatoes in my garden this year. The plants are looking very healthy, they're all flowering. I'm really hoping it's going to be a good year in my garden.
So my favourite plant is probably Nicotiana benthamiana. So that is a plant, it's related to tobacco, and basically it's amazing for imaging. So really flat leaves, nice leaves, and you can do something called transient transformation. So in 3 days you can have constructs and you can express it in the plants and put them under the microscope and see what's happening. So for experimental reasons, that's probably my favourite. Constructs, so what we do is the way we express or we look at the proteins, the things that we're interested in, is we make these specialised DNA constructs. So this will have the gene of interest, whatever the gene may be, something that goes to a particular organelle or something, fused to a fluorescent protein, and we will then put this into agrobacterium, which is a special bacteria, and this bacteria can infect plant cells and get it to express genes that it wants to, and then we use that, we literally just inject it into a leaf, fills the leaf space, put the plant in the growth chamber, come back 3 days later, and it's all the cells, a lot of the cells are expressing the constructs that you have put into them.
So my favourite plant is a plant called Utricularia gibba, and it's this weird carnivorous aquatic plant which I've spent the last 8 years of my life working on. So it floats in stagnant ponds, and it sucks in tiny little invertebrates. And it's really fascinating to me because it lets us answer these questions which other people can't. So one is, how these traps are formed from what used to be simple flat leaves, and the other one is looking at the internal patterning of leaves. So the normal leaves on this plant have huge air spaces that let it float. And that really means that we can then start to look at how those air spaces are patterned, which is actually really difficult in normal flat leaves, which also have air spaces, but looking inside and looking at how they're patented is really, really difficult. Whereas in this aquatic plant, it's a lot easier. So a selfish answer, but that's what I find fascinating.
My two favorite plants is the ones I like to have in my garden. I'm really keen on trees. Believe it or not, we have a lot of pot trees and a lot of trees in our garden, and I like my olive tree, and I like my citrus trees, and I like all kinds of fruit trees. But of course, I'm a plant cell biologist, and not only do we work with Arabidopsis, but we work a lot with tobacco plants. So despite it not having the best name, it's a fantastic plant for looking at protein expression and looking at structures. So these two are my favorites.
My favorite plant is Pinus pinaster, or the maritime pine. As I said, I'm really interested in trees, despite the broccolini. But I'm really interested in trees, and the maritime pine has a strong connection to my home, which is Rome. And you can see it all around the city and all around the Mediterranean landscape, because it was cultivated by the Romans. And I actually live near a pinewood forest that was it's artificial, so it's not like a forest that was established, but it was established in the Roman times. So it's really interesting to see, and it's unfortunately one of those things that get affected by climate change, because it's very, very prone to fire. So I find it incredibly fascinating, though. I like pines.
So my favourite plant, it's hugely biased by the fact that I've got a research group working on it, and I think I'm going to have to back the species that we're really working very hard to understand. So it's going to have to be wheat, and the fact that it's got such an interesting developmental portfolio, and there's a real potential that we can actually still use this crop and develop this crop further for global food security.
My favorite plant is I think I would have to say the model plant Arabidopsis thaliana. It's not a very exciting plant because it's not very cool, but we know a lot about it. It has a super short life cycle. Even though I'm a plant scientist, there's very few other plants I actually know a lot about. So I would have to say, yeah, Arabidopsis thaliana.
All plants are my favorite plants because I feel I want to help them all surviving. So I eventually worked on bean, tobacco, Arabidopsis and barley through my career, and I have to say I found barley really fascinating, especially because I probably gave me the most satisfaction in my studies. But also model plants are so important, like Arabidopsis, and they can be very surprising still. You know, they even produce molecules that can stop the growth of breast cancer cells, which is something I published a few years ago.
My favorite plant could be Arabidopsis, which is the one that you use every day. But I think a more interesting one is maybe something like Hibiscus, which instead of having one colored petals, it has multiple colors, and it has this bullseye pattern where it starts by being purple and then it's white. And it seems that is important for predation and for bees to be able to pollinate and so on. And that also has some interesting mechanisms behind of how it manages to have this pattern instead of not having a pattern.
I love red beech trees. I just think they have the most beautiful crown shapes, and the dark red of their leaves, I just find them really pretty. A large part of what I like about plants is just they are so beautiful, like these repeated patterns that combine into this complex shape. I just really enjoy.
It's a very difficult question to actually answer what is my favorite plant, because I am not a botanist, but I must select olive trees, and this is because it was the first plant species that I work with, so it does have a special space in my heart. So during my PhD, I work in understanding how olive trees respond to a pathogenic fungus that in Spain, where I did my PhD, was really kind of decimated the olive trees. And just having that first contact with a big thing like an olive tree and see the different varieties, not being actually a plant biologist, it just pull the strings in my heart. And also because, an olive branch is a sign of peace. So if I have a plant that I will give to a friend to demonstrate my love, is an olive tree.
So my favorite plant is, probably you've not heard of this, is Gynandropsis gynandra. It's really important to me because of two reasons. It's the model plant that I study, and it's a C4 plant. It is an underutilized species from sub-Saharan Africa, and so that's why it has this important potential to be like one of the highly studied species in my area of research, and we have good resources for it, and probably it's one of the stepping stones that will help me feed the world and future-proof the crops.
My favourite plant has to be the bee orchid. I mean, I love all orchids, but the bee orchid, I remember the jolt of absolute euphoria when I found my first one when I was about 10. And also the way it reproduces, the pretending to be a female bee or solitary bee, which basically is the plant equivalent of a blow-up doll at a stag party, and the poor male bee comes along and tries to mate and gets extremely frustrated and comes away with the pollen body stuck to the top of its head. And I mime this for the students in first year, and often they come up to me in fourth year and tell me it's literally the only thing they remember from first year is the bee orchid. So it's both a sort of personal thing and a professional thing, my love for bee orchids.
I really like working with wheat because it has a really complex genome, and it's so challenging to understand what happens behind the scenes that I think will be probably my favorite plant to work with. That's the reason I want to work with wheat in the future.
So my favourite plant, I think, is probably the ash tree. I've been working on ash for about 10 years now, and I've really got to know ash trees. They live such a long time. They're fascinating species, and most of them are older than I am that I work on. And they've started to suffer from a disease which I've been studying for the last 10 years. So I think they're probably my favourite tree, and I'm very sad that it's possible they won't be around for the next few generations because they're really suffering from a disease called ash dieback.
My favourite plant disease is a bit of an obscure one. It's called Arabidopsis, which causes leaf spots and some dieback on plants like conifers. But the wonderful thing about it is that the spores look like little helicopters. They've got little appendages at the top, which splay out. So it's really interesting to see under the microscope.
So if I were to be asked what's my favourite plant, I think I would probably say the runner bean, because that's where my journey began. And I still have a small garden and I like to grow runner beans. And I still, even though I've now studied the processes behind how a seed grows, I still find that amazing that you can have something and you can keep it in a packet for years and years and years, and you can come back to it like I did. I found some seeds somewhere I'd forgotten about, and you sow them and they grow. I mean, it's just, yeah. So for me, the runner bean, probably, because that was where my spark was in terms of just thinking a bit more deeply about what a plant is, as opposed to it just being there in the background for us.
Oh, favourite plant question. There's all the really exciting Rafflesias in Borneo, there's the massive trees. It's tricky, but actually for me it's cacti. I love cacti. I'm a member of the British Cacti and Succulent Society, and I think cacti are just the most magical things, with the spines and then these wonderful big flowers that they can produce. They're the best.
Do you have a favourite cactus?
Favourite cactus? Or some kind of echinopsis, I think, because of the flowers. Really beautiful flowers.
My favourite plant? Well, I should say Arabidopsis, because that's what I spent most of my career working on. But actually I'll choose cotton, because we also have research collaborations with a group in China, in Wuhan, and that is on cotton research. And cotton's a really interesting plant for all sorts of reasons. One of the things that's kind of interesting about it is in the 14th century, before cotton was really recognised in Europe, there were these myths that developed around cotton, whereby it was reported, and there are little drawings to describe this, it was reported that there are these plants that were growing sheep, that were dangling off the branches and eating the grass. And that led to the development of a myth called the vegetable lamb of Tartary, which is like fascinating. And there's drawings of these things from the 14th century. So there's lots of other things that are interesting about cotton, but that's kind of one of the kind of weird things about it, for sure.
I'm sure a couple of people have already mentioned this favorite plant, and it's called Arabidopsis thaliana. So it's really the workhorse in molecular biology, plant molecular biology. It's a really tiny plant. It's not showy. You wouldn't notice it if you were in a field, but you've probably walked past like on a sidewalk. And it has been so important for us that I think we need to sort of rally up some appreciation for Arabidopsis thaliana. They're not as fancy as the giant redwood sequoias or the beautiful flowers, but has been so fundamental for our understanding of plant science that I think we need to give some credit to Arabidopsis.
So my favorite plant is rice, because when I was growing up, so I learned like rice cultivation like by hand. So I have hands-on practice how to grow rice from seeds to grain. I know each and every step, and I saw during my childhood how hard it is to grow rice and how fascinating the plants are. How like you prepare the fields, like you start with one field, then you put them in another field, then you harvest them in like another time, and rice is like a big part of our life. So it's like a second major staple food like crop in the world. And in our culture, like rice we use for some like religious reasons. So it's like before Diwali we harvest the rice plant, make like a flattened rice, and we put it like for God and things. So like rice is like always major part of my life. So I was like really fascinated with rice.
My favourite plant is the friendship plant, which grows little babies off the roots, and you can cut these off, and now you've got a little cutting and you can pass these on to your friends. So I was one of the first houseplants that I got, and it's just a nice way of just sharing plants with other people. So that's my favourite plant.
So my favourite plant, that is one of the most difficult questions that I get asked on a regular basis. I think since moving to the garden, my favourite plant is probably the jade vine in our collection. I think it's beautiful, I think it's fascinating. It's a brilliant plant to do teaching with because children know about pollinators like bees, and that's really cool. We can show them the bee borders and that's really interesting. But the idea that bats can pollinate something, and the size of the flowers, they're quite tactile for children if we can pick them up and show them. So yeah, I think probably the jade vine.
My favourite plant is specifically a 650-year-old oak tree in the village I grew up in. I've been fascinated with it my entire life, walking past it every single day since I was born, essentially. Not when I was first born because I couldn't walk, but you get the drift. And I've been so obsessed with this thing. It's huge and knobbly, and there's rabbits living in it, to the point where this Christmas I decided that I would hop over the big barbed wire fence around it, measure it and record it for the Woodlands Trust Ancient Tree database. It is about 650 years old with a girth of about 6.5 meters. So I was thrilled. It is on there now. You can go find it on a database. So that's my favourite tree, which is technically a plant, famously. I think my favourite plant also, my favourite wildflower, is Herb Robert, because it grows out of the smallest, tiniest, dustiest little cracks in the pavement. It's so beautiful, and it has a lot of old folkloric herbal medicine uses as well.
I think my favourite plant is the Azolla water fern, which is basically this tiny, tiny microscopic fern that lives on the surface of water. It doesn't look like a fern at all. It looks like algae, or algae that's like accumulating on the surface, but actually it's this tiny fern that's got these gorgeous pink and green colours, and it's really good at like filtering the water system and working with bacteria to fix nitrogen. And as well, it can work as like a deterrent for mosquitoes because they can't penetrate the surface of the water to lay their eggs. So it's really good also in areas where like mosquitoes and malaria are problems as well.
So if I have to think about what's my favourite plant or plant pathogen, it would have to be a plant pathogen. When I started, after about 3 years of working, I was asked to work on rose black spot disease. A fascinating disease, and we used molecular techniques and things like that. But it was just at the time my daughter was born. So my daughter, we were looking for names. So I did think about, she's called Madeline or Maddie, and we're thinking what would her second name would be. And we're thinking, well, could we call her Diplocarpon, because that's the name of the fungus. We thought that was a little bit mean. So my daughter is called Madeline Rose, and that is because I worked on rose black spot. So that is why the rose and rose black spot is dear to my heart.
My favourite plant, I think, I would say as a group of plants, I would say it's the bryophytes. So the bryophytes are the mosses and liverworts, a few other things. But the reason I really like those is that they're everywhere. You can walk along the street in a town and you can see moss. You can see, if you're careful, you can see the liverworts growing in cracks and stuff. So they're there, and they kind of give that sense of knowing where you are, and this kind of regularly seeing stuff is kind of comforting. There's amazing biology of mosses. The moss leaves that you see are haploid, one copy of each chromosome, which blew my mind. I still remember it when I first found that out. I thought everything was diploid, so 2 copies of each chromosome like humans, and it's not. Loads of plants are not, actually, because of this thing called the alternation of generations. And moss are an example of that, where actually the plant that you see there is haploid. So every time I see them, I think, whoa, wow, amazing facts about moss. It's brilliant.
I'd probably say my favourite plant is actually just the general oak tree. It's so beautiful, it's so majestic, they're everywhere, they're beautiful, and I've got this as my necklace, which is an acorn and oak leaf.
So my favourite tree is the olive tree, because I'm of Greek Cypriot heritage, so that plant has had an affinity in my culture for thousands of years, and I think it's really, really gorgeous. And also it's known as the tree of peace, and also it from a medical perspective, it lowers blood pressure, causes vasodilation, and a study showed that it was as effective as captopril for lowering blood pressure. So yeah, I love it when plants, show themselves to be good in science as well.